All right, welcome everyone to another community office hours. This is a Terraform community office hours, and we're going to be focusing on the vSphere provider. Today, I've got four awesome guests with me, and I'm going to just let them go around and introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, I'm Tejitha. I am the PM for the Strategic Integrations team at HashiCorp. My team owns the vSphere provider, and today we'll be talking about vSphere provider, obviously.
I'll go next. I'm not sure how we're rotating around the cameras. I'll just go next. I'm Alex. I am the engineer currently on the vSphere provider at HashiCorp. I've been working on it since probably November of last year, sort of picking up and bringing things along. And been really thankful to meet some of the other people here.
I'll go next. My name is Kyle Ruddy. I'm on the technical marketing side here at HashiCorp, where I get to focus on all things Terraform, including the vSphere provider, of which, for those of you who know a little bit about my history, I may know a thing or two about after being a vSphere admin for a very long time. Know a little.
And I'll go next, assuming you guys can still hear me. My name is Ryan Johnson. I'm a Staff 2 Solutions Architect and the Cloud Platform Engineering team at VMware. We're focused on Cloud Foundation Validated Solutions, and I am a collaborator from VMware's side on the Terraform provider for vSphere.
All right, and that is our wonderful bunch today. So what are we going to do today? Well, first up, before we get into anything, I do need to put down our code of conduct. Just be welcoming, inclusive, friendly, and patient at all times. Be considerate, be respectful, be professional. And I've got a link down there just in case you're curious as to how much you can push the limits if that was your intention. But anyhow, moving on. The goal of today is to discuss a couple of things. One is going to be the new 2.1 release and what's to come in the 2.2 release. And then finally, just we do have a survey, assuming we get enough people. And then we just want to collect any questions or feedback you might have. So please feel free to, at any time, interrupt us, throw something in the chat, because we would love to answer that. But for the unacquainted, because the Terraform Community Office Hours audience, I know that we're going to draw on people from all different types of backgrounds. Ryan, I was hoping maybe you could sort of give us in a nutshell of what the vSphere provider is if you have not worked with it yet.
Yeah, so if you haven't worked with the Terraform provider for vSphere, it's been around since I think initial incarnation around 2017, 2018, if memory serves. But it's a way to interface with the vSphere, or specifically through vCenter, with a vSphere environment using Terraform. So you can create things like clusters, deploy virtual machines, configure vSAN, configure your availability and cluster settings, and do many of the capabilities that you have through, say, PowerShell or through the vSphere UI, that do it in a declarative syntax. It uses the Go vMommy project under the covers as the Go library, and yeah, it's just a declarative way to interface with the vSphere environment.
Yeah, nice. And I think it's good just because, that way you have some context coming into this if you haven't used it. And speaking of which, I'm going to throw some links into the chat here that I'll point you to the registry, or that's the GitHub. And then we have the actual provider documentation. And then finally, we do have something for longevity, a pinned GitHub issue on the repo. So if you want to leave any feedback that's long-lived, I guess, and that we can respond to asynchronously, that would be the place.
That'd be nice.
So, go ahead.
That'd be really nice. Any feedback from this or any questions, please feel free to use that GitHub issue.
Yeah, which is what we are here for today. So, I mean, I'll just hop right into it. Tej, you kind of pulled this all together with Ryan. I wanted to ask you, how did we arrive at 2.1? What was the general strategy to get it there? And I'll just ask it as someone from the community, why is this like a year later? Just like what were the thoughts? What were the wheels spinning to get us there?
Sure. I started looking into the provider just from the usage perspective about a year ago. And while I was looking at both community and or like Terraform customers, it made sense for us to start working on this provider. That was one signal. The other one was generally the market by itself for like on-prem and vSphere was no way going down. So it was important for us to like contribute to the provider or like keep continuing to contribute. That's where we started spending some time just like looking at it where we left off and what are the most important features that would create that impact, find that product market fit for vSphere. And that's when we started working on it sometime in Q4 of 2022. By the end of Q4, we did have a little gap with respect to like VMware knowledge. And that's where we reached out to Ryan and we built that partnership so that we could have best of both worlds, Terraform and vSphere. And we formed the partnership wherein we equally contribute to the provider. So that's where 2.1 came through. It did address some of the features we believed was most important based on the community feedback, and also address some of the longstanding issues that Ryan or Alex will go into. But most importantly, like clean up the repo and like get it ready for the next releases.
Yeah, I can add on to that if you don't mind, Cole. I've been using the provider for quite some time as a user, and sometime late last year or mid to late last year, I started looking at how could I contribute? Being someone that's been around from VMware and having used vSphere for a long time and all our products. How could I contribute to the community? And I think that's kind of where I got started. I started looking at the issues in depth, the number of issues, the number of type of bugs versus enhancements, and looking at the community and figuring out where how could I play my part, right? How could I contribute to make this a better community? And by virtue of that, I wound up talking to Tej and talking to Alex and Brandy, the engineering manager, and we worked through a method of getting to better collaboration so we could actually start to triage the issues that were sitting out there, do some categorization on the issues, put things in buckets, look for duplicates, so we could actually see what the state of the community looked like in terms of activity or major issues and enhancements. So we start putting those in buckets and start prioritizing what could be the next new features, or what are some of the major outliers that we're seeing in terms of issues with resources or data sources. And so it's definitely became a tight collaboration through sometimes just a sheer grit to kind of roll up your sleeves and get involved. I spent a lot of late nights just kind of learning the code base and the documentation myself, and it's been an absolute pleasure working with this team to do so.
Nice. And I do have obviously more questions to get through. I've got one for both Alex and Kyle here, but since it is community office hours, I do want to transition to a question that we have from Ian Drennan. I'm going to just go ahead and put the two-parter up here on the thing here. So got some questions as this goes on, especially how to effectively handle transitions to Terraform when an ops team has a lot invested in Ansible. Specifically, there are things that end up overlapping, and understanding the migration strategy and code organization is always a question. So who would like to take the first part of this? I'm going to go with Alex for one.
I'll do my best to answer some of that question. I want to definitely clarify a bit more of my background so that I don't falsely advertise anything I don't know authoritatively. I have years of experience at HashiCorp doing provider development, but with that comes expertise in things Terraform and developing for Terraform. But typically speaking, I just do my best on the sort of backend vendor I'm working on, because I work on a variety of providers. So vSphere specific questions today, I'll definitely be looking for help from everyone who's here. But to talk a little bit about ops, I haven't had to do ops in a while, so please take this with a grain of salt. I imagine from the experience I had with Ansible in the past, typically you do work with a lot of config, but it's structured in a way I think that's kind of almost like imperative coding a little bit. Sometimes then you end up running a script that then does stuff. If I'm totally off base, then I apologize. I'd say the first thing that you want to do if you want to migrate to Terraform is try and really identify things that are static declaration and things that are sort of like manipulation or more workload related. Terraform really succeeds at making the sort of piece or whatever cloud or backend vendor you're working with look the way you describe it, but it's not really meant for you to tell it then what to run on it. Although there are some of those abilities in the vSphere provider. So I'm sort of saying one thing, and then the provider lets you do something else. But typically speaking, that's what I would recommend focusing on is taking your declarative pieces, bringing those to Terraform, your sort of just static overview of your infrastructure, and things that feel more workload related, like provisioning things after the fact, stick with Ansible or lean on a different tool, or figure out something else that makes sense for your sort of applications flow or pipeline.
Yeah, right. Like if you're using the virtual machine resource, right? Use it to deploy the virtual machine, configure the virtual machine, manage the lifecycle of the machine. But in terms of what's actually running on top of the guest operating system, the configuration of the applications, you may at that point, instead of using like provisioners, right, you use something like, you still use Ansible. You could use Salt, right? If I see Joe, the SASE engineer, and Chris and Ian on. So Salt would be an option as well if you're worrying about like the configuration of the actual the operating system specifically, or the applications running on top. But in terms of like the container, the virtual machine resource, that's where you'd stick with Terraform.
And Kyle, it looks like you had a twinkle in your eye during something that Alex said. Do you perhaps have something to add? Maybe a story on top of that?
Well, operations is kind of my background, and I have plenty of EUC related stories, and including one, where I blew up an entire Horizon pool that was, maybe in production. Great story. Only slightly career limiting move on that case, but it's definitely one of those cases where echoing what Alex and Ryan have said, it's basically you have to take a look at what you are configuring versus what you are provisioning. Now, when it comes to the EUC space, you can always use something like a packer that's going to build your images, so you can make the actual VM template that you're laying down, basically about as immutable as possible. But in certain of these cases, when it comes to EUC, you're going to have either people or teams that are in different groups who have requirements of different applications. And so at that point, it comes down to how many images do we want to manage versus how many, after the fact configurations that we want to manage. And so some of these things are kind of organization specific in terms of where you feel your comfort level is. And then as you start getting more integrated into the provisioning process, into building images, into all of these different aspects, that's where you decide where you start transitioning. I mean, the easiest part is going to be, of course, using the virtual machine resource, because that's the easiest part of, how do you, lay down a virtual machine in a repeatable fashion. Terraform on the provisioning side makes that super easy. But it's, do you have resources for all of the individual pieces of the operating system that lives within that virtual machine resource? And that's where you stay on the Ansible side. We work very well together. We have provisioners that allow you to tell Terraform to hey, go reach out to your tower server, or what have you. So some of this also comes down to those organization specific areas.
Yeah, it's like Ian had a response here in the chat. It is a lot of times about finding the right tool, right? The way I look at things is, not everything's a nail, right? And you're just going to use one tool for it, right? I might have to manage infrastructure in one way and workload in another way, and there might be some crossover, some bleed over, but you have to find, where the sweet spot is with your tool set, and not always have the expectation that one thing's going to be that multi-tool, and just kind of to bleed in on something that Kyle was saying regarding like Packer, right? Using Packer, create those virtual machines, right? And then deploying those virtual machines with Terraform. There's integrations, between those. Just a quick selfish shout out. If you're looking at learning Packer and how to deploy those with Terraform, there is a project on the VMware-samples GitHub project for Packer. You can take a look at that and see some examples that I've created on that, but also how to use the Terraform plans to deploy those virtual machines. There's some examples out there.
Nice. And I'm just sort of going through the questions here. We'll stick with these till we finish those up, and then we'll go back to our other discussion. But we did have a comment here that I'll just put up on the screen. And it's interesting where, I don't know how much Kyle and Alex, y'all have experimented with console Terraform sync, but where does that fit into play in terms of Ansible, right? Because there's usually a place for everything, but what specific features do you think of that are you can somewhat replace out with Ansible, if any?
A little embarrassed to say, as someone who's lived and breathed Terraform development for the last 4 years, I haven't played with the other HashiCorp products as much as I should have. I hope that doesn't look bad. I feel like I'm doing terrible PR for the company right now, but I would imagine, again, it's weird to be a developer who doesn't have to do a ton of ops, speaking to an ops crowd. So I'm always just trying to do my best right now. I would imagine, though, that console is sort of there for that network discovery layer. That's my understanding of the product. So I imagine that sync might, again, just replace some of the things that you had kind of been ad hoc, maybe scraping together in an Ansible playbook. I could be totally off, so I apologize if I am. But I imagine that it might, again, just cover another slice of your story. But every company is going to have such a varied, project and application that you might be using Terraform for this. You certainly can do some workload stuff with Nomad. Maybe you do workload stuff with Kubernetes. Maybe you do networking through console. Maybe you do networking through a script that queries your DNS, and it just is a very sort of ad hoc, bashy type of thing. I've done some weird things at previous jobs, so maybe it's not the best thing, but I feel like there's multiple ways to skin the cat or whatever.
Haven't we all?
But I think that it's probably what it's going to be accomplishing is just covering another little slice of the full story.
Ted or Kyle, did you have anything on that?
Yeah, so console Terraform sync kind of opens up a very interesting door into some of the capabilities that you can do when you combine what Terraform can do when instructed with the kind of power that service discovery can do. Now, I do want to kind of throw out the caveat that a lot of the things that exist for console Terraform sync today are around certain things like firewall rules and different like adding pools or pool members to load balancers. But that doesn't mean like if Terraform is a thing that you can create, it's all open source, like you can do whatever you want to. So like you certainly have the capabilities to say, hey, in the case of EUC, like if we see a virtual machine that comes up and it logs or it hits console and says, hey, I'm a VDI instance and I belong in this pool, like there's nothing that could stop something like a console Terraform sync from telling it through Terraform to join the VDI pool. The capabilities are kind of endless and they're kind of fascinating when it comes to like thinking about it from that kind of automation phase. But honestly, I haven't seen anything that exists about that quite yet. So I don't want to get too far ahead of our skis on that one.
Nice. So sum up, it has its place. I really liked both answers there, but yeah, Ansible's just going to do so much it's got so many different more use cases that it can accomplish, whereas console Terraform Sync is very specific to what it does. So yeah. So unless we have anything on that, we do have a more just Terraform specific question here from Chris, which is just dealing with changes that happen outside of TF plan become easier to reconcile. That is an interesting question. I would love to hear everyone's answer on this, but I would like to see maybe if Tej has some more information we don't know about around that, or maybe any plans there on that front.
No, I think like Alex can best answer this question.
Yeah. I'll speak to Terraform is obviously a growing ecosystem, and it does involve a few teams. So I could take up the whole session here. I gotta make sure I don't get too far in the weeds. But yeah, Terraform. The Terraform core team is sort of responsible for creating the almost theoretical idea of what is Terraform, and essentially, I'm trying to do this really quick. It's just a graph of mapping, inputs to outputs and deciding what order to do things. And then, requests get made over a protocol to my side of the story, which is, mapping essentially, CRUD, like a CRUD create, read, update, delete to a backend API. And then Terraform will reconcile, if things are different. And I think that's just what came up with something about reconciling changes outside a plan. So can I read that one more time? I'm dealing with change outside Terraform's plan. Yeah, so I guess I don't want to speak ever definitively about stuff and say you can't do this or you shouldn't do that. But typically speaking, we advise infrastructure changes, outside of Terraform are not the canonical use case of Terraform. Like we're expecting you sort of keep that maybe insulated away from your Terraform config, or put in the work to maybe import. I mean, you can import resources into Terraform. You could not capture it as a resource, but maybe just use a data source to read something that you seem to be changing outside of Terraform's lifecycle, maybe. But typically speaking, Terraform is actually there to try and notify you, the practitioner, that something has changed out of band. Just so you know, like you created a VM and its name was Alex, and we haven't run since, but when we did a refresh, its name is now Kyle. And how do you want to proceed? Do you want to overwrite Kyle with Alex again? Because that's what you have in config. Or you could say, oh, right, we did something out of band. I'm going to change my config and say the name is now also Kyle so that things match. So I guess I didn't really answer the question that well. I apologize, Chris. It's certainly, we always want to find ways to make Terraform as great of an experience as possible. But we certainly right now are, advising that if you want to do something in Terraform, only have Terraform be the thing that's mutating it. Stuff out of band, while not impossible to work with, it's going to create weird challenges probably.
Yeah, we've seen those odd challenges. Just be, completely transparent. For example, recently I was working on an issue where, say you have a virtual machine resource, you're managing it through Terraform, great, but you are adding a out of band because currently the provider doesn't support vGPUs. There's a pull request in for that we need to review. But if you were adding a vGPU out of band and you did a Terraform apply, there would be a crash, right? And we had to figure out why is that crash happening? How do we resolve that? And so sometimes when you might make a change outside of Terraform, it may have some downstream impact to the provider, which we are taking a look at as we need to.
I'll just say that's a tricky thing in general for Terraform when you change stuff outside of it, because it really is meant to kind of be your workspace.
Mm-hmm.
And I know we've added in 1.1, we added more stuff with refactoring and those move statements. I know that's not a direct towards dealing with change outside of, but it can help you with refactoring, which can often lead to some of those things that happen outside. But Alex really nailed it on the import tools as well. But it's just sort of the workflow. Yeah.
I'd like to. I see a comment. I hope I'm not messing up your moderating, Cole. But I see a comment.
Oh, I'm just going to go right down the list here. So
okay, they were hoping for easier import, and I think everyone at in Terraform is aware that it's very bare bones at the moment. I can't speak to like any future plans there or anything, but certainly if importing was more powerful, it'd be great. It'd be great for Terraform. We'd get more people onboarded. So it's definitely something we keep in mind.
I have seen some interesting open source tools around importing to make it a little easier. Occasionally, I can't recall the names of them, but I have seen some that were geared toward making the imports a little easier. But I think those outside of vSphere.
Yeah, if you, for sure. I can always link those to the YouTube description after the fact if you'd like to share those. Okay, so moving on to our next one. It's actually a follow-up from Ian here. And this is just, if we start with a basic VM state and want to slowly grow to managing larger things like security, et cetera, what's the right way to grow into Terraform? So this is sort of a more of a general Terraform question, but I'm sure we can probably kind of, I would like to hear from a VMware side of things, how you go about managing these larger projects.
Well, that's Ian. He's from VMware, I believe. What was the question there? Or is the screen's a little small here? Sorry, Cole, what was the question?
Oh, you can't. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little smaller.
So if we're starting with basic VM state and want to grow to managing larger things, so I'm assuming that you're managing smaller things and smaller parts of your infrastructure with Terraform, but you want to grow it and start managing more. What is the right way to do it? I can speak on this generally. I'm sure. That's all I can really speak onto it generally, but hopefully.
I think I'd defer to Kyle, to be honest, because of his extensive knowledge in whether Terraform open source or Terraform cloud or Terraform enterprise, and how people kind of graduate from using just say the open source into the other aspects, or even to managing it at scale with just the open source.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this comes down to kind of our last conversation of really like how, what's your comfort level with managing some of these things? Like for a lot of the folks that I talk to, like managing virtual machines is basically, it's built into their operations background. Like it's something that's just, automatic now. So at that point, once you get comfortable with that, where do you transition to next? Is it something like, NSX? Do you get into, say, maybe firewall rules that support maybe that virtual machine, or groups of workloads, or where do you go from there? And that really comes down to what your comfort level is with those technologies, and it also depends on your comfort level using things like the import statements or some of those tools that can take existing resources and configurations and export them out so that you can easier import them back in. One of the big ones is, Terraformer, and I know there are some other ones that are out there too. Microsoft Azure just released their Azure Terrafy tool as well. That's
what I was thinking of.
Yeah. And so like even then, like we've kind of taken a stab at that in this experimental phase as part of the 1.1. I think it was alpha. There was a Terraform add command that was available for a very small period of time. It was kind of just how is this thing going to work? And a lot of it really comes down to like just being able to define what you want in your configuration files and then specifying the import to actually bring it in and manage it. And again, that it really goes back to being able to like run that import statement, rerun a plan, and being able to really understand the output that Terraform is telling you about. So you don't want to run something against NSXT if like all of a sudden you run a plan and it's like we're going to change these 50 things. Well, you probably should have a good understanding of like how you got from point A to point B with those 50 different things. And it's all about comfort level.
I did want to jump in. I'm hearing a little echo. I hope that's not me. I don't know. I'm hearing echo, folks. I'm sorry if anyone's mics are on. Okay. I think one of the techniques, as a lot of people use Terraform for pretty small situations, and you can keep things relatively flat in that sense, where you just declare a bunch of resources. I don't know if I'm answering the question in the way that Ian wanted it to be answered, but a technique you can start to look into as you grow a larger infrastructure with Terraform would be using the sort of more advanced config, I'll call them tricks or features. One of them being modules, where you can sort of predefine kind of like a template of common resources that always end up being together. So, for vSphere, that could be like a VM, a data center, and I don't know, a license or something like that. Yeah, cluster. You might want to modularize that. And then one of the sort of newer, it felt new, but it's been around for, I guess, a little while, is like the looping features, like a for each. Because you might find
for each versus count, right?
yeah. Count was the old, the old way. Had some limitations. For each is sort of the 0.12 plus. 0.12's been out for a little while now, so definitely the canonical way of trying to sort of scale out, multiple instances, from like a list, like you had a bunch of IPs coming off of one resource and you want to make a bunch of VMs, one for each IP or something, coming up with something very simple there. But on top of growing the providers you use, like I see in that question, there's security. Okay, maybe you're reaching for Vault, maybe if you want to. There's NSXT. I know there's an NSXT provider, I think. Am I wrong? Am I right? I believe there is.
100%.
Yeah. You're going to start using new providers and interpolating values between them. It starts to get a little crazy. Then you're going to want to start to refactor your config to use those tricks I just mentioned, modules and things like for each.
Just one thing I kind of touch upon is when you think about using a provider, you're going to think about how are you going to use it? What are you going to use it for, right? There's different resources, right? There's resources like Alex was saying for, say, creating your clusters, managing hosts, managing availability settings, resource pools, distributed switches, standard switches, and the like, right? And then there's the virtual machine resource, which happens to be a very large resource. And each one has their different, strengths in the levels of configuration, and sometimes I'll say the nerd knobs you can turn, because there's so many features in vSphere, right? And you have to make the determination, okay, how do I want to use this? Do I want to use Terraform to manage the creation of the infrastructure, right? Maybe I'm managing it to create my vSphere environment. Maybe I may use the Terraform providers for NSXT, right, to bring that in so I can manage, hey, even though I have, virtual machines deployed, maybe I want to manage my access list, etc. And you may not use the provider to manage virtual machines, and that's okay. Maybe you have another, CMP tool to use on top that does that specific job, and maybe that integrates with something like an Ansible, right, to manage the workload site. Again, it comes down to what's going to be the right tool for the right job based on how you want to structure your system, right? Not everything's a nail, right?
It's not. No, I'm kidding. Nice. So I'm gonna kind of go through here because we've been in a lot of great questions. I noticed that some of these are actually aimed at people in the chat. So if you do want us to address those, just point out. I'm more than happy to loop back around, but we've got some other stuff to cover. And for our questions that are more generalized towards Terraform infrastructure as code in general, if we have time, we'll answer that at the end. But I do know we wanted to focus on the vSphere provider. And one that I see immediately is from Dave here, and this is around just turnaround around fixes. And I know that both Tej and Ryan here, you both wanted this to be a part of this. Was what does that look like? What does the turnaround cycle? How can they go about getting that feedback to you, and what does the work look like involved?
Yeah, I can take the first step here. Ideally, from this point forward, we're aiming for 1 to 2 big releases a quarter. We did release 2.1 this past quarter, and we are aiming for 2.2 sometime in a month to month and a half. Please keep me honest here, Ryan and Alex. But right now, so we are incrementally working towards that goal. We reworked our entire repository to communicate that. So if you do have issues that are of higher importance or priority, please communicate to us so we can move our priority and like move things around to be included in the releases. Because it doesn't point to what exactly this issue is, I would say, Dave, please do like communicate to us like through the GitHub issue. Just say that it's important to you and why, because it would give us an opportunity to prioritize it with other use cases and other important things already on our roadmap. You should be able to see that in our milestones tab.
Yep.
Ryan, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, I could talk ad nauseum about this just because I've been so close to it. Having come in, you know, near the end of last year and taking a look at issues and kind of the state of the state, which we talked about before. My goal was just how do we improve the overall community interaction and kind of, I guess I'll use the term stabilize the community in a way in terms of what we had in the GitHub repo. There were tons of issues, right? A lot of duplicates, some being categorized, some things being worked on, some things not being worked on. And what I've tried to do working with the team here is look through. I've looked at every issue that's on that repo. I think in December there were like 300. I think we're down to 112 right now, with more enhancements than bug reports, which is a good position to be in. We started categorizing all those. So as you look through the issues, you'll start to see that using extensive use of labels now on all the issues. So if something comes in, gets categorized as a bug or an enhancement, we improved using forms-based issues. So GitHub issues are now forms-based, so it's a little more, we will ask you for some specific information. We encourage you to fill out as much as possible. We do have requirements on what needs to be filled out. We review these on a regular basis, and the issues are labeled. Typically, some are automatically labeled through the GitHub Actions, but they do have to have kind of some eyes on the issue to determine what's the category, right? And one of the things that we use on the community are the reactions, right? If there's somebody puts in a request for enhancement, say somebody put a request for an enhancement, say 3 years ago, right? And there's one, the person that put it in, or zero, plus, thumbs up reactions, is that really an enhancement that's needed? But if someone put one in, last Tuesday and there's 86 thumbs ups, that's probably something that we need to look at. And so we start taking those and we start putting them into buckets, and you'll see on every issue, it's going to be labeled. It's also going to be put into a milestone. By default, they go into like the backlog. And as we triage through and we start to pick out the ones that have high comments or high reoccurrences, or we've seen duplicates before of being reports, now we start to kind of find the signal and the noise and say, yeah, we really need to pull that item forward. And you'll see those land into milestones that may be tagged for, right now you'll look out there, you might see a v2.2.0, a v2.3.0, a version 3, which we even have some issues that have breaking changes. And since we use semantic versioning, we move those forward to, plan those for a 3.0 release. So you start looking at how those are being managed. Honestly, we encourage the community to get involved as much as possible. I mean, at least from my perspective, get involved in helping to answer questions. And if you see an issue and it's got a lot of reactions, and you want to contribute, you can offer up to actually contribute and be part of the community and actually put your contributions in and work with the folks like Alex and Tej and myself to bring your contributions for whether it's a bug fix, it's a documentation fix, it's a new feature that's got a lot of thumbs up and needs to be worked on. We encourage that. I don't know if Tej or Alex want to have any other comments on that.
Yeah, no, I'll take it over. I think that's. I mean, I don't want to just I hope I'm not pumping anyone's tires here, but Ryan's been. I mean, I can't say enough how Ryan's been amazing at getting that sort of triage process in a much better place. Don't want to dance around things too much, but it was obvious with that sort of lagging release that a lot of people noticed that there wasn't a ton of good cadence being put into the provider at that time, sort of sometime last year, but we have sort of turned the cadence around a bit. So hopefully, if there are bugs in particular that are really troublesome, I certainly want to make. I don't want to. I hate promising something and then not delivering, and then people are disappointed. But I'd like to think that if there is a big blocking bug that's affecting a lot of people, we're going to try and get to that pretty quickly. Enhancements can be a little trickier just because, I think I saw a comment somewhere in the chat about how, infrastructure as code is an art and not a science, or they were asking like, what do we feel about that? And if I were to answer it right now, I'd say, yes, I agree. It's a bit of an art form. As a result, sometimes there's a lot of enhancements that come to a provider or enhancement requests that someone like me has to make a tough call on, like, is this appropriate in Terraform or not? The vSphere provider in particular is very special in that sense because it has that VM resource where things get a little trickier and like, ooh, is this something we want Terraform to be managing or not? Or is there a better tool for it? So enhancement work is a little harder to get up on the priority list. Bugs, if we're not doing a great job, we will try and do better on getting them addressed. And in general, on contributing, I think part of that's on me and on us. The provider is a little lacking, this one in particular, on that sort of continuous development flow. Like, other providers will work against, say a SaaS or a cloud. And so we have automated testing that runs nightly for them and makes, the process a little bit easier. That is something we are currently working on. I haven't sort of, made that publicly known on the repo, although I guess now you're hearing it from me a little bit unofficially. We are putting effort into making the provider easier to develop on. So that will involve, documenting what it's like to write tests for it, documenting what it's like to develop on the provider. I'll probably just lean on some of the other guides we have out there that my other colleagues have written for other providers. We'll try and bring that over. And getting the testing story in particular a lot easier for the community to interact with, because let's face it, vSphere is very special software in that it runs both on sort of public cloud. It can work on-prem. It can also just work in a very small, tight home lab with lots of hardware interfaces. So we got to make sure we can create a testing story that everyone can consume if we want other people to write PRs for the project. So it's something that's on my mind and hope to get in a better place soon, but it's not easy.
Yeah, it's definitely been on my mind, and talking about community and contributions, couple related items. I can look on the chat here, and I could probably throw a rock at the chat. Not I would, but and hit a VMware person that I know, right, from my own organization. I would encourage, even if you are interested in contributing, you're looking at using the provider, reach out on the community. Look at the FAQ. You'll see who the maintainers are and the collaborators. Contribute to issues. If you have a lot of knowledge on the provider, become someone who helps to answer questions, or even to help confirm that a bug is a bug. Right? If you see, someone put forth an issue, but there's not enough information, right? Sometimes people put forth an issue and there's not enough information for us to really be able to do a reproduction or to confirm, right? If you want to be part of that community, step in and help. You're talking about testing infrastructure, and I'd issue a challenge here to. I see Kaylin's on, right? Kaylin, you've got some amazing work that I've seen, in your own repos to do for building a home lab, like a home lab with Terraform and nested virtualization. How cool would it be for us to collaborate to build a method to build how to build the home lab with the Terraform provider itself, right? Kind of dog food it, so to speak, but then so anybody can run the acceptance test of when they do a pull request they can run the acceptance test on their local environment if they have a home lab available. So there's a lot of lots of opportunities out there to contribute and be part of the community, to add new help on adding new features, triaging. There's lots of ways people can contribute. It literally could just be documentation. It's literally how I got started working on this provider, was just trying to help with some of the documentation and some issues that were causing me concerns, right? And we're constantly working to improve that. And we have some big ideas about how we can improve the documentation in the future too. So hope that makes sense.
Nice. Thank you for that. So long story short, would love your help, would love your feedback, love to test out some of the new processes that have been added to incorporating that feedback into the repo. And yeah, everything is appreciated. So just to keep us on schedule here, I know one of the things that we wanted to do was get some feedback from people. We've got kind of a coffee shop-ish audience here. And so any of your all's feedback would be helpful. We've just got like 3 questions here. This is completely anonymous, so we're not going to like take this and put it on Kyle Ruddy's Instagram or whatever. I don't even know if Kyle has an Instagram, but
his beard does, I'm sure.
Yeah. But it would be very helpful. We're just trying to get through some stuff here. We've got three different little areas of questions, but in the case that people are too shy to answer, we're going to just keep talking while we lead this up here. And don't feel bad if you don't answer. I'll feel bad, but that's okay. I can stomach it. So one thing that I wanted to ask you, Ryan, was back on the 2.1, since we've kind of cleared some of the questions out here, what is the biggest workflow change that's happened for you, the practitioner? Like, what was something that was done? You're like, all right, sweet, my day-to-day now is more efficient. Like, what are those big changes for the day-to-day?
Well, I can't speak to the day-to-day because I'm on the engineering side, so I'm not exactly I am a user of the providers, but not a day-to-day. But one of the things I would say, and it's a subtle thing, right? To me, it's one of the things that I was at least putting forth in the provider for 2.1. And if you look at the changelog, Alex does an amazing job keeping the changelog updated. Also, any things that are planned for upcoming releases, you'll see that being added to the changelog as those PRs are merged. But one of the things from a practitioner perspective that I kind of geared down on for 2.1 was documentation. And it might seem like a small thing, but as a practitioner or user, people need to be able to go to the documentation and look at the examples and be able to take those examples and have a starting point, right? And really help them understand what the capabilities of the resources are, the data sources, maybe an example or two or more. Like if you're looking at the virtual machine resource, there's lots of examples that were completely rewritten, and also ones that were rewritten to take out, things like the, I'll call it, Kyle, correct me if I'm wrong, I say legacy interpolation, right? Where we don't need that, and I don't think we need that in 13 and later. But trying to clean those up so that if I need to go get started as someone who's been using the provider, someone who wants to understand what new features or capabilities are coming in the provider, someone who's just getting started, to actually have those solid examples to really put me up for success. So that's one of the biggest things that I think we started to see inside. We also added a lot of capabilities on things like tagging on resources. We're almost there in terms of customer attributes and tagging. Tag all the things. As some people may say, I think we only have 2 resources left to add tags, which is on my plate to do. That's probably the biggest thing for 2.1.0, and we continue to have several new features coming in, or a couple new features coming in for planned for 2.2.0. I don't know if Alex wants to talk about what those look like.
Yeah, I think to talk more about 2.1, I hate to
hold on one second before we get to 2.2. I do want to just go ahead and move on through the poll here, just because we've got through that. I'm trying to move it in between our questions. Let me go ahead and do that. So
Gotcha.
Looks like most people 1 to 2 years. We've got one person that's been in actually, I can't do my percentages here, but a good spread. So it doesn't look like anyone's been, well, it looks like a couple people have been using it like completely or for the whole time. But I'm going to go ahead and put up the next question. And then Alex, I'd love to hear, well, I guess we can move on to the 2.2, though. If Kyle or Tej, if you had anything left on the 2.1 before we move to that, that would be great to hear.
I don't have any.
Okay, cool. Okay.
Yeah, so I will
2.2 then. Sorry to interrupt you, Alex.
My bad.
Oh, go for it.
Oh, go for it. Okay. Yeah. So I think I want to speak quickly on 2.1. I think it's probably obvious if you took a look at the change log that it was a little bit more so on the maintenance side of things. We had tons of documentation updates, which I think are a big thing, because it's something that had been sort of lagging on the provider a bit, and then lots of small bug fixes. So I feel bad if anyone's expecting huge new features. Those are more likely coming in, I think, probably milestone 2.3 even, which would be the one after. But for 2.2, again, it's going to be a big push on picking up some of those long-standing bugs and issues that have been plaguing the provider for a bit. We're hoping to sort of get most of them resolved, and then 2.3 forward will be more so, larger feature work. I think there's a few tagged there that people really want to see, like cloning related features and stuff like that. There is a lot going on behind the scenes, though, so I definitely don't want to ever overpromise and underdeliver. That we want to make sure that the provider goes in the right direction, and there should be some more messaging. I don't want to call it a roadmap necessarily, but certainly some public-facing messaging captured in text in the repo going forward that talks more to sort of the direction of where we want to take the provider. And so there's a bit of a large effort going on behind the scenes right now, which is my excuse for why there isn't a bunch of hot, new, awesome, resources available to you. But certainly we are always balancing the priority on new features, small features, larger new resources, bug fixes, and then, long-term architecture. It's something that we have to think about in the code base. And, there's lots of people here who are familiar with the term technical debt, and that does exist in this provider. And we will, dividends will be paid later if we, make some not so outwardly fun changes now that seem like, oh wow, all these new features are coming. We're really doing more stuff behind the scenes and around the testing process and development flow that will hopefully allow for that type of progress to happen in a really, improved cadence down the road. It's a very political answer on my part, I know. Non-committal to anything, but we'll do our best.
I could take some of the 2.2 stuff, if the 2.2.0 stuff, if you like.
Go for it.
So mainly I say this because I worked on I worked on these bugs myself in my free time, and just kind of talk about kind of reiterate on the community. I work at VMware, right? I use the providers, but it's not my day job, right? And I do this out of like my sheer passion. I think you see that in a lot of people who get involved in the community of helping people, kind of digging down and how we can help resolve issues. And sometimes it's just fun, right? So sometimes you got to bear with us. Like if something's assigned to me, it's going to be on my free time, right? Unless I can allocate that around my work time. But and some of the things that I worked on, like for example, we had issues when you were a virtual machine resource. If you were importing a virtual machine resource and it used a SATA or IDE controllers, maybe some legacy type appliances, it would fail. We've resolved that issue. We've made some adjustments around network IO control and supported traffic classes. We've addressed an issue where I mentioned the GPU earlier, where like if you added a virtual GPU or another PCI device external, a pass-through device to a virtual machine, and you did a reapply, it would fail. We've addressed that issue in the 2.2. We had an interesting issue where if you imported a data center, it wouldn't exactly find the right folder, which could, on a reapply, could cause some problematic issues. addressed that issue. And we fixed an issue where if you were trying to add a PCI pass-through device on a cloning operation, where it would not apply the pass-through device on the initial clone, and I've addressed that issue. There's been some documentation updates, of course, for 2.2, some more. I just updated all the data sources to remove all the legacy interpolation and just kind of clean up all the data sources. I think it was as of yesterday. Let's see, last thing. Oh, we added support. One of Kalen's asked to support the data source virtual machine to support UUID. I added the ability to run, we had the ability to run guest customizations and run like a Windows script, like a PowerShell script, or et cetera, in a Windows after the provisioning, just like custom specs do today. I added the same thing for Linux, so you can run a script on a Linux machine if the VMware tools have been configured appropriately on that machine, which is pretty cool little feature. And added support for custom attributes on vSphere host. Now that's just a small handful of things that we're adding in the 2.2 release. If you go to the issues on the GitHub repo and you click on the milestones tab, you'll find the 2.2 milestone there, and you'll actually see a list of the remaining identified pull requests and associated issues that we're planning to finalize for the 2.2 release. And once we finalize that, we'll be closer to actually getting a release out. So yeah.
Nice. That was pretty all inclusive.
Yeah.
Thank you.
One small piece. I also it's committed. Maybe people will like the idea or not. I added the support for scalable shares on clusters and resource pools, and that's just waiting for us to merge that in and test it. So, and a couple other data sources, but yeah. Again, as a community member, right? Kind of getting involved and working with the maintainers here and trying to be involved and make this a better provider.
Nice. Very nice. So I'm going to move the poll on to the next one. So we're going to put this one up on here while we continue talking. So now that we've kind of gone through the 2.2, Tej, I kind of wanted to loop back to you. We've talked about it, but just sort of in summary, in terms of gathering community feedback and that entire plan, could we get sort of like a nutshell summary of what it is that you should be doing to make sure that this gets done the best and the fastest? Just like step 1, step 2, step 3, if
can
possible.
You rephrase that question? Which gets?
Yeah. So I've got a problem, or perhaps I've experienced pain points, as we're seeing. Yes, and I recognize that this question was not made open-ended, so we'll just pretend that that it's not there. But for these people chiming in, what is the first step they should take to go and get those pain points addressed in a nutshell? I know we've talked about it at length, but got a few.
For sure. This past quarter, right? We tried, and we believe that the entire repository is in a position that it communicates our intent, what we're prioritizing, what is coming in the next release, what came in the previous release. So the most important thing that the community can do for us is keep continuing that priority through GitHub, through issues, like create tickets that make sense, create questions, ask questions that make sense for us to dive deep without having to hold that on and wait for more information or not understand what it is. So if you can reach out to us with a perspective of the use case, what you tried, what didn't happen, what should have happened and what didn't, it gives us more perspective to get back to you quicker with what's possible, what's not, and what's the alternative. We try to address that with our issues like the issue creation as well. It goes through a lot of questions. Ideally, some of them are required for us to not put you in that state. So if you can continue to either an issue that is more important for you, or you're also blocked on, or provide more information that adds to an existing issue. It could be a use case. It could also be a different config that resulted in the same issue. So providing more information will help us look at things that are more active or more users are blocked on. I think the biggest pain point for us when we're looking at issues is just like, we don't know what this means, or like we need more information, or we don't understand what this customer is trying to do for us to like look into it. And then we just move on to other things that are more of an importance or priority from the information we have. So the more they can communicate to us through the repository, it would be beneficial for us and also them and the community. So we can address things that are more important.
Nice, perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and close the poll up here. I appreciate the limited responses, but again, if we're just coffee shopping, I mean, I wouldn't expect people to like rush me with stuff as well. So I appreciate the answers. Every little bit of feedback
depends on the coffee shop.
Go ahead and pull this off here. True, it does, doesn't it? It always depends on it, right? Something I wanted to ask Kyle, because I don't feel like I've heard from you too much. And this is more of a general question. With the vSphere provider, I wanted to ask you how it both stacks up and works into play with other VMware automation tools, right? Because I know that that's going to be something you're going to have a number of those in play, and oh, you're grinning, so I'm going to just let you go.
Oh yeah, it's like the existential question of how you want to manage your environment. You know, it's imperative versus declarative. It's mutable versus immutable. It's, you know, idempotent versus non. Like it all comes down to what you and how you want to manage the environment. VMware has done a fantastic job over the year providing so many different automation tools to be able to automate the process of managing the vSphere environment. Obviously, I'm a huge fan of that. And if you look at any of my historic resources, you could probably tell how excited I am about some of those capabilities. But I think at this point, once we're getting to like this kind of like multi-cloud world where we're having to manage things that are, on premises and private clouds or hybrid clouds or public clouds, like it really comes down to like just maintaining a semblance of like unification as far as, taking the same concepts and applying that to the same way that you manage infrastructure across the board. And so, I think there's obviously a lot of promise with the vSphere provider that's existed for a long time. And I think there's a bright future that's going along to help support the vSphere provider as well. And, I'm very excited to see where that's going.
Nice. Does anyone have any follow-ups to that? If not, I've got something for Alex, but if you do, please chime in.
No, I just have one question before we close out the stream later.
Okay, yeah. So let me hit Alex with this because it's gonna go in combination with a question from our one of our audience members. So, Alex, you've talked about it from a practitioner standpoint. What should they keep in mind and know about in terms of the engineering aspects of it and stuff you do? Like sometimes that'll affect how you go about working. More insights why certain features may or may not be there. And to follow up with that, we have this question here: what is the ideal provider that's sort of the mentor of it?
I lost a little bit of audio from you. I don't know if it was on my end or your end. I can definitely answer the question that Olaf has posed, but I didn't quite hear the question you had leading up to that. If you could repeat it quickly, sorry.
Yeah, no problem. I blame my internet. So it was just, what do you think are the things that practitioners should keep in mind from an engineering perspective? So stuff that you're doing that I'm not going to see as a practitioner because I'm probably not going to be cracking up in the source, right, but that I should keep in mind going forward.
Oh, that's a really good question. I think we're over time, so I'll have to be really quick about it. But I think one of the biggest things to keep in mind is that I think at least Terraform is very successful because it allows practitioners to, declare something, and then it is so. It just works, and that's exactly the state it's in. You have to recognize, though, that behind the scenes, the provider essentially smooths over all the wrinkles of the backend you're working with. So sometimes a provider we'll have a problem that comes up a lot. It's called eventual consistency. This is like if you're dealing with like, a big public cloud, they have tons of servers fielding their API requests, and you create something and it exists, but it doesn't exist yet across all their edge nodes. And then so when Terraform then asks it again, okay, we created it, I'd like to now get the rest of the data from it that's created. It'll then say 404, it doesn't exist. It's just totally a heuristic that we have to apply. There's no like pure science around it, but the provider often has to do things like retrying and very sort of ad hoc and domain specific coding around the quirks of the system you're dealing with. What's great is for the practitioner, then things are hopefully pretty smooth, but sometimes you'll have a resource that might have like a nested block that you configure some stuff and you think like, okay, that was easy. Sometimes that nested block behind the scenes is like a whole mess of like 10 API calls being put together to create this abstracted, nice little piece of data for you that you've defined. So yeah, we're pretty careful. I think, the providers, because vSphere has been around for a while, such as like along with the other public cloud ones, there are things in there that certainly we could do it all again. Maybe we wouldn't do, or maybe we do differently. However, we're not going to go around breaking everyone's stuff at this point. But there's a very measured approach to new enhancements going forward. I tried to touch on that earlier. And sometimes if I don't get around to addressing something, maybe that's not the best course of action, but it's typically because it's like very nuanced behind the scenes. And I can't even find the words on how to describe why that might be great or create problems for the provider. So that's kind of like the little insight into the engineering aspect is, behind the scenes, we're doing a bunch of dirty work that we're happy to do, but, sometimes we have to make tough calls. And then to answer Olaf's question, I had my first experience in provider development was the AWS provider. So I'll say that one because it's somewhat simple in its architecture, but still, repeatable in terms of like you could create more and more resources in a successful way. So I think the large public cloud providers, they have more resources on it currently. So they definitely have like a nice system in place, but each of them is different. Our Google provider is a partnership with Google. So maybe what we end up having is more so that one for this provider because we have this partnership with Ryan and VMware. Some providers are like generated and do really crazy stuff. I don't know that we're going to get there yet. I think our implementation is going to stay on the simpler side for now. But yeah, there's certainly we'll be drawing from the best parts of those large public cloud providers that I'm sure everyone's familiar with because they have a long tenured history at the company, and the processes to make those successful are pretty well defined. So I think we'll be striving to take the best parts of all of those for this provider.
Nice. That was a thorough answer. Thank you for sharing. Well, I think that's bringing us up towards the end here. Ryan, I believe you had something you wanted to ask.
Yep, and it's mainly just for the chat to come through. So as Cole's wrapping up, it would be great if for those who are still in the chat, if you wouldn't mind sharing, if you're a user of the provider, maybe what your maybe post your top GitHub issue that's an issue for you for the provider, or your top resource or enhancement that you would like to see. Just post in the chat. I'd love to see that, and I'll pass it back to Cole to wrap up.
Yeah, or you can also use the issue that Ryan just pinned regarding this office hour.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a wonderful idea.
I just dropped that link in the chat so y'all can navigate to that. Okay, well, I believe that brings us to the end here. Did anyone have any other final thoughts or stuff they wanted to talk around 2.2? No? All right. Well, vSphere has got its groove back. We're going all in on it. We've got Ryan, Alex, Tej on it, and we will occasionally yank Kyle in for his VMware wizardry. So that'll be wonderful. Thank you everyone so much for stopping by. I will put the links under the YouTube description. Please check out that GitHub issue. Give us any feedback that you have. The GitHub repo in general will give you a lot of insights, anything that you need to do, as will the registry page for its documentation, which I will also make available below in the YouTube channel. And then you've got well, you have two of our Twitter handles here. I meant to get everyone's Twitter handles on the on our names here, but they'll be in the description after the fact. Thank you so much, everyone, and until next time.
Thank you.